On the morning of March 14, 1994, a postal worker named Gerald Foss drove his usual route into Dryfield. It was a town of 312 people, a grocery store, a diner, a church with a cracked bell tower. Gerald knew every mailbox by heart. He turned onto Main Street at 6:47 in the morning, and what he saw, or rather, what he didn't see, stopped him dead in the road. Every door in Dryfield was unlocked. Every stove in every kitchen had been turned off. Every bed had been slept in, and every single person was gone. The first call came in at 6:52 a.m. Gerald Foss told the Garfield County dispatcher, and these are his exact words, pulled from the recorded log. "There's nobody here. I've driven the whole street. I knocked on 4 doors. Nobody's answering. The town is just empty." Deputies Corey Maddox and Tina Harwell arrived on scene.
Watch the intersection near the old mill.
Their incident report, reviewed in full, describes the following. 12 residences entered. 12 residences, occupied the night before, confirmed empty. No signs of forced entry anywhere. No signs of struggle in any dwelling. Personal belongings, wallets, purses, medications, car keys, left behind. Deputy Harwell noted something that would later become the most unsettling detail in the entire investigation. In 7 of the 12 homes she entered, the clocks had stopped, not the same time, not a power outage, different clocks, different times. All stopped between 2 and 3:15 in the morning. No explanation was ever found for this. To understand what happened in Dryfield, you first have to understand what Dryfield was. It wasn't a tourist town. It wasn't on the way to anywhere. It sat at 7,200 feet elevation in a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines, connected to the outside world by a single 2-lane highway, Route 9, that became impassable 3 to 4 months a year during heavy snow. The community had existed since 1887, founded as a mining camp. By 1994, it was what demographers call a remnant community, a place that used to be something and now existed mostly out of habit and stubbornness. Its oldest resident was 91-year-old Edna Krause, who had lived in the same house for 63 years. Its youngest was a 7-month-old infant named Lucas Mercer. Both were gone. 312 people. Not a single one remained. By noon on March 14th, the FBI's Denver field office had been notified. By 4 p.m., Dryfield was officially a federal crime scene, though investigators were quick to point out they had no confirmed evidence that a crime had actually occurred. Special Agent Raymond Chu, the lead investigator assigned to the case, gave a carefully worded statement that afternoon. He said,
"We're treating this as a missing persons investigation of significant scope. At this time, we have no evidence of foul play,
no evidence of a natural disaster, and no evidence of any voluntary mass evacuation. We are pursuing all leads." What Chu didn't say publicly, and what emerged only in FOIA documents released 9 years later, was what investigators found when they began canvassing the surrounding forest and terrain. Boot prints, hundreds of them, leading out of Dryfield into the tree line, and then nothing. As if 312 people had walked to the edge of the trees and simply ceased to leave tracks. Investigators began building profiles of the missing residents almost immediately. What they discovered added a layer to this case that the official record has never fully resolved. In the 2 weeks before the disappearance, there had been a pattern of behavior across multiple households that, in retrospect, reads as deeply alarming. The Dryfield General Store, the town's only grocery, showed purchase records for unusually large quantities of canned goods, bottled water, and batteries across at least 40 separate transactions. Phone records, subpoenaed from the local exchange, showed that calls between residents had increased dramatically in the final 72 hours. Not calls out to family in other towns, calls within Dryfield, neighbor to neighbor, late at night. And then there was Pastor Alan Rowe. Rowe had led the Dryfield Community Church for 11 years, by all accounts an ordinary man, not charismatic, not extremist, well-liked and uncontroversial. But the Sunday before the disappearance, March 12th, witnesses from outside the town reported driving past the church in the early afternoon and seeing what one described as every car in town parked outside that church at the same time, a full congregation, on a Sunday afternoon. That wasn't a scheduled service. Whatever was said in that church on March 12th, no one who attended it was ever found to tell us. Over the years since March 14th, 1994, 4 main theories have emerged to explain what happened. I want to walk through each one honestly, because the truth, when we get to it, sits between all of them in a way that is profoundly uncomfortable. The first theory: mass voluntary departure. The theory with the most official support. The idea that the residents of Dryfield collectively and secretly planned to leave, abandoning the town entirely, starting new lives elsewhere under assumed identities. The problem with this theory is not the motive, it's the logistics. 312 people, including infants, the elderly, and a man named Frank Dubois, who had advanced Parkinson's disease and required a wheelchair, all moving silently through rugged mountain terrain in the middle of the night, without a single one being spotted, reported or traced on any road, highway or transit record anywhere in the country. In 30 years of active searching, not one person from Dryfield has been positively identified anywhere. Not one. The second theory: a cult-orchestrated mass event. The church gathering, the late-night calls, the stockpiling. Federal investigators looked hard at Pastor Rowe and found a man with no criminal record, no known extremist affiliations, no financial irregularities, no history of manipulation or coercion. They found a man who, by every measure, was exactly what he appeared to be. And yet, in Rowe's home, investigators found his personal journal. The last entry was dated March 13th, the night before the disappearance. The FOIA release includes a partial transcript of that entry. I'll read it to you exactly as it appears in the document. Thine dainty Tushtik in the Niemin Handa. I don't have the words for what we've been told. I'm not sure words exist for it. I know only this, that staying is no longer possible, that what is coming is not something that can be waited out or weathered. I have asked God for guidance, and I believe I have received it. Tomorrow we do what we must do. I pray it is enough. What he was referring to, what he believed was coming, is never specified. The journal ends there. The third theory: environmental or geological event. In 2006, an independent geological survey of the Dryfield Valley was commissioned by a private research group. Their findings were unusual. The valley sits atop a layer of magnetite-heavy granite with a documented history of producing localized electromagnetic anomalies, fluctuations powerful enough, according to the survey, to interfere with electronic instruments and, in prolonged exposure, potentially affect human neurological function. This was the explanation that kept certain researchers up at night, not because it explained the disappearance, but because it might explain the behavior in the days leading up to it. The stockpiling, the late-night calls, the gathering, the sense of dread. If prolonged electromagnetic exposure can induce paranoia, hallucination, and shared psychosis, then what the residents of Dryfield experienced in those final days may not have been a rational response to a real threat. It may have been a mass psychological event triggered by the ground beneath their feet. And in that state, they walked into the dark. The fourth theory is the one that gets the least attention in official documents and the most attention from the people who've studied this case longest. It has no name. It doesn't fit neatly into any framework. It is simply this: something was there. something the residents of Dryfield encountered or were warned about that we have not yet identified. Something that made 312 people, including a woman of 91 and an infant of 7 months, leave everything they owned in the middle of the night and walk into the mountains, not fleeing. Evidence suggests they walked in a group, orderly, together. The footprints, according to forensic analysis of the soil impressions, showed no signs of panic, no running, no stumbling. They walked, calmly, into whatever was waiting for them.
Bravo team, fan out. Keep the dogs moving. We're running out of
Over
time
a period
here.
of 3
Copy
weeks
that.
following the disappearance,
now.
the largest search operation in the state's history was conducted across the ridgelines and wilderness surrounding Dryfield. More than 400 search and rescue personnel, military-grade thermal imaging deployed by helicopter.
Copy. Sending ground team to your
Ground-penetrating radar used across an 11-square-mile radius. Nothing, not a body, not a campfire, not a discarded water bottle. Nothing that suggested 312 people had ever entered that forest. One of the search team leaders, a man named Dale Prescott, who had led mountain rescues for 18 years, gave an interview to a local paper in 2005 that received almost no national attention.
We can't yet.
He said,
We're still tracking the
"I've
last
pulled
known
people
coordinates."
out of these mountains after avalanches, after plane crashes, with zero visibility. I've never not found something. You look long enough, you find something. A boot, a bone, a button from a coat. You always find something. We found nothing. And I've thought about that every day since. Every day since. Dryfield, Colorado still exists. Its buildings have never been demolished. Its streets have never been repaved. The federal government placed the town under a designation in 2004 that prevents development, sale, or demolition of any structure, citing the ongoing nature of the missing persons investigation. The diner is still there, the grocery store, the church. Pastor Rowe's journal is in an evidence archive in Denver. Lucas Mercer, the infant, would be 31 years old today. His parents, David and Sarah Mercer, had moved to Dryfield just 4 months before the disappearance. They were from Cincinnati. They'd wanted a quieter life. Their families, both sets of grandparents, gave interviews for years, waiting. Sarah Mercer's mother, in a 2009 interview, said something that I think is the most honest thing anyone has ever said about this case. She said,
I don't need to know how. I don't need to know why. I just need to know that somewhere out there, my daughter
and my grandson are alive and living some kind of life. That's all I'm asking for. Just let that be true. The investigation remains open. In 2019, an investigative journalist named Clara Voss published a 40,000-word long-form piece on the Dryfield disappearance for an independent outlet. It remains the most comprehensive civilian investigation of the case. Voss spent 4 years on the piece. She tracked down every relative of every Dryfield resident she could find. She obtained FOIA documents that had never been reported on. She hired a geological consultant and a forensic linguist to analyze the pastor's journal. And in the final section of her piece, which I'd encourage every person watching this to read in full, she arrived at a conclusion that isn't satisfying, because it isn't meant to be. She wrote, "What happened in Dryfield was a decision. 312 people, by every piece of evidence we have, chose to leave, chose to go together, chose to leave behind everything that identified them to the outside world, their names, their records, their possessions. Whatever they were moving toward, they were not running from us. They were walking toward something. And the most haunting possibility, the one I've spent 4 years trying to find a way around and cannot, is that they found it." The case file for Dryfield, Colorado, runs to over 14,000 pages. It sits in a federal archive in Denver. It is still marked active. Gerald Foss, the postal worker who discovered the empty town, who turned his truck onto Main Street on a cold March morning, expecting nothing unusual. He gave one interview in 2004, and has refused to speak about that morning since. In that interview, he was asked what he remembered most. Not the empty houses, not the unlocked doors, not the cold. He said he remembered the silence.
Small towns aren't quiet. You don't notice it until it's gone, but small towns make noise.
Dogs, furnaces, someone's TV, a car warming up. There's always something. That morning there was nothing. Absolute nothing. And I remember thinking, whatever happened here, it didn't just take the people. It took the sound. 312 people. No remains ever found. No individuals ever identified elsewhere. No explanation ever confirmed. The town of Dryfield still standing, still waiting, still silent. The Dryfield disappearance till this day still remains an open federal investigation.